Evening. This is Robert Sungenis coming to you once again on the Robert Sungenis live program. This time for November 3rd in the year of our Lord 2021. So glad you could be with us here tonight. As you know, this program is set aside for you to ask your questions, give your comments on any topic whatsoever. And I, as my role as host of this program, will endeavor to answer your question to the best of my ability using our Catholic faith, scripture, tradition, the saints, the fathers, the doctors, the encyclopedias, the catechisms, the popes, the councils, and just about anything I can use to help you walk away satisfied that your question has indeed been answered. We come to you every week on Wednesday from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m., and sometimes we go over. Sometimes we hit 3 hours, believe it or not. And it depends on the amount of questions, how fast I go through them, and all kinds of things like that. Also, whether I have enough energy, because I work during the day, of course, and now it's night. And when I'm over, I go to bed, ready for another day. Before all that, let's go to our board tonight to see if we have any questions. And we do. We're starting questions. I do want to do this first, however. Somebody mailed in a question today, and I'll answer that. And then there are some questions left over from last week, and I told you I was going to get to those, and I'm going to try to go through them as fast as I can. So hang on. We're in for a fast ride tonight. All right, first question is, what is the difference between the days and years if both refer to the sun going around the earth? Oh, good question. Okay, so from the geocentric perspective, and even heliocentrists can talk from the geocentric perspective because it's easier, as a matter of fact. But what's happening is as the universe goes around the fixed Earth in the geocentric system, it's carrying the sun and stars with it. Okay. And the sun, however, does not go as fast as the rest of the star field. And I think one reason for that is because it has an inertial drag from the planets, the 8 planets, including Pluto, that are hung on the sun and, retarding its movement slightly by about 4 minutes per day. And if you add 4 minutes per day up, you have 365 days for the year, you see. So basically, as the stars are going around, the sun's going around also, and that happens every day. Okay. But every day, the sun is retarded in its movement by about 4 minutes. And so, what it's going to do, if you compare the sun's movement to the background of the stars, the sun is going to go backwards, what we call retrograde motion, through the stars. And that's what we call our zodiac. The sun goes through the 12 constellations of the zodiac every year because it doesn't go as fast as the stars do on its daily trek. Okay. And it's going to take a year for that sun that's moving more slowly to go all the way around the zodiac and start back where it was at the beginning. It takes about 365.25 days for the sun to get back to where it started. Okay. So that's the difference. That 365.25 days is what makes our year. Okay. So really the larger motion, or the more prominent motion, is the stars and sun going around every day. Okay. The less prominent motion that you don't see, so to speak, is the sun, going not as fast as the stars, and it's retarded by 4 minutes. And so that makes another motion, and that gives us our year. So that would be the difference. Okay. All right. So let me get to the questions from last week that we didn't get to. And I'm going to go through these real fast, okay? So I'm going to try to do that from now on so I answer as many questions as possible. Question: in the Eucharist, is the substance of the blood identical to the substance of the body? Are we referring to the same substance, but simply using a different name for it? That's a very good question. And I quite frankly, I think I know the answer to it, but I'm not quite sure. Okay, because I don't know of any church document that deals with that question. Usually, we say that you can receive the host or the wine that's turned into blood. You can receive either one of them because, theologically speaking, they're this body of Christ, so to speak. So Christ only has one body. But I have never confronted this question before, and I'm at a loss to give you an exact answer to it. When we see Eucharistic miracles, we see both the body of Christ in flesh, okay, and we see the blood, and that blood has a particular type. There's four types of blood: A, B, AB, and O. And every time they analyze the blood from these Eucharistic miracles, it's AB blood, which is, that's significant in itself. That shows that that identity, that human identity of Jesus, is like everybody else's. Some have A, some have B, some have AB, some have O, and so it makes a distinction even in a Eucharistic miracle. So the question would be, because when we talk about the substance of the bread being replaced by the substance of Christ, that's one thing. Because the word substance is sort of generic, we're talking about a whole human being, and we don't really divide it into blood and body, okay? And as a matter of fact, they're so intertwined that you really can't have a body part without having some blood there. I mean, even when we eat meat from the store, we have to drain the blood out of the flesh because it's just so intertwined. But I mean, if you really want to get technical, that blood is not really in the muscle, so to speak. It's in the veins and arteries, and they're attached by capillaries. Okay, so the blood doesn't get into the meat per se, the flesh, but the blood vessels are so fine and they break so easily when you have a piece of meat that you're throwing around cutting up, that the blood just spills out, but it spills out from the veins, arteries, and the capillaries. So it's different than the flesh. And so the question, would again come back to the same thing. Is the body of Christ the same thing in substance as the blood? Okay, now in the real body of Jesus, of course, they would be different. There would be blood and there would be body. Now, whether that is in the Eucharist or not, okay, that's a very good question. And I am not equipped to answer that question. So I'm going to have to pass on it. And maybe somebody can do some research on it and find out what the church's teaching is on that. All right, question. My name is Joe. How do we properly understand the verse, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall not pass of the law to all be fulfilled? Well, what it means is there's two things, because in that context, Matthew 5, Jesus is the law and the prophets. So it's not just the law, okay? The law and the prophets. Why is that? Well, the law there represents basically the Mosaic law, but even the Psalms can be considered the law, because Paul quotes from the Psalms when he's talking about the law in Romans chapter 3 and 4. So the law can be also in a generic sense, but usually, if you want to confine it, it refers to the Mosaic law. Okay. Now, whether it's the Mosaic law or the Psalms or any other part of the Old Testament that's not prophecy, okay, that law had certain predictions that the covenant, the old covenant, the Mosaic law would last until the first coming of Christ. And at the cross of Christ, that old covenant was revoked. It was abrogated according to all the New Testament passages. And there's probably about a dozen of them that say that. So the old covenant is revoked. So that was fulfilled. Okay. So in that sense, Matthew 5:18, which is where you're getting this from, is saying that nothing, even in Jesus's day, before he went to the cross, he had to fulfill all the Mosaic law. Okay. And when he finally died on the cross, that was the last fulfillment of the Mosaic law that was required. Okay. So in that sense, the law was fulfilled. Okay. But there's still prophecy in the Old Testament. That has not been fulfilled yet. There's prophecy in Isaiah 65 and 66, talking about the new heaven and the new earth. Okay. There's prophecy in Daniel chapter 2, chapter 7, chapter 8, chapter 9, and 12. There's a prophecy that has not been fulfilled. There is prophecy in Zechariah. Zechariah 12-14 basically covers the first and second coming of Christ. 12 and 13 have already been fulfilled. There's 14 yet to be fulfilled. Okay, in Zechariah. We got Ezekiel waiting to be fulfilled. A lot of Ezekiel's prophecy was fulfilled at the cross, but we still have some future left in Ezekiel. So a lot of these prophets, are prophesying the second coming of Christ. And that's when heaven and earth is going to pass away, you see. When Jesus comes back, the sky is going to be rolled up into a scroll, and the stars are going to fall from heaven, and blah, blah, blah. And then the new heaven and the new earth is going to come. So that's what Jesus means there. Not one jot or one tittle is going to be taken away until all is fulfilled. And he means everything. Okay. So, in the sense of till heaven and earth pass, that's referring to the prophecy in the Old Testament. And that's one reason why we want to say that the Old Testament hasn't been revoked. Okay. And this is where a lot of people get confused. The Old Testament hasn't been revoked, but the Old Covenant, that is the Mosaic covenant, has been revoked. Okay. So, this is a very important distinction we have to make, because sometimes when people read the Catechism of the Catholic Church, I think, what is it, paragraph 131, it says, the old covenant is not revoked. Okay, and that statement got everybody confused. Well, we always thought the old covenant was revoked. Well, you're right, the old covenant is revoked. And it's unfortunate that the Catechism uses the word covenant, and this is because the word testament and covenant can sometimes be interchangeable. Okay. And sometimes they're both compared to a will that we have in our society. We write a will, and when we die, our goods go to the beneficiary of that will. Well, a covenant's similar to that, and a testament is similar to that. Okay, so sometimes those words can be interchanged, and sometimes they're not. And we have to be very careful when they're not, because we don't want to confuse the Old Testament books, because we don't call them the Old Covenant books, do we? No, we call them Old Testament books. We don't want the Old Testament books to be confused with the Mosaic covenant, which is the normal term we give for the Old Covenant. Okay, there's the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. The Old Covenant was in Moses, the New Covenant's in Jesus Christ. Okay, so when the Catechism says in that paragraph, the Old Covenant is not revoked, if you look at the context of that statement, that is before and after, is it 121 or 131? I forget. It's right around there. Anyway, when you look at the context there, what's it talking about? is talking about the Old Testament books. It's not talking about the Mosaic Covenant. You'll never find that in that context where the Catechism is talking about this stuff. It's always the Old Testament books. And that's what we want to make clear. If the Old Testament books were revoked, wow, that would be a tragedy, because that means the prophecy is not going to be fulfilled about the second coming of Christ. Okay. So, yeah, those Old Testament books have not been revoked, but the Old Covenant with Moses has been revoked. And that's a crucial distinction we have to make. All right, let me go on, see if I can find some other. I haven't looked at this list yet, so I'm with you, is trying to figure out what. All right, let me question. Curious what your opinion is of EWTN. I think we talked about this last week. Hey, EWTN is doing as best as they can in the crisis that we're in. So I'm glad we have a Catholic television station still on the air. Okay, it could be a lot worse where we don't have anything. Okay, but I'm happy that they're there. That's all I'll say. So, okay. When I go to read "You're Not by Faith Alone," do you suggest I use a translation like the RSV CE instead of the Douay, so that the text is more close to what Protestants are used to? Yeah, that would be a good idea. And this is from Josh Dolph. The RSV is the Revised Standard Version, and that was originally a Protestant translation, first produced, you see different dates for this, but first produced in 1946 and then 1951. And then the Catholics came out with their own modifications of the RSV to make it, if there's any difficulties with the Protestant translation, they would come in there and they would change the translation. And then at the end of the Bible, the Catholics give you all the places that were changed. Okay. It's not very many changes. The RSV is generally a very good translation. It's always been understood to be a good translation. It has its problems like any other translation, but it's usually pretty good. And the CE at the end of that, RSV CE, is Revised Standard Version Catholic Edition. And there's actually, that was made in 67. And I have that one. And it's a good translation. Usually, to be very honest with you, I will go to the RSV first before I go to any other translation, because they can be trusted more than the other translations. And of course, the Catholics have their own version of the RSV. So you can get those still today. RSV CE is what it's called. Okay, let me move on here. Question: what is the Catholic view on the rapture? We believe in a rapture. Okay. We just don't believe it the same way that some other people believe it, some Protestants. There is a whole movement in the United States called dispensational premillennialism. That's a Protestant view of eschatology, actually more than eschatology, because it goes all the way back to Genesis, and that's the dispensational part. And then the premillennial part is the eschatology that goes up to the rapture. Okay. And here's the difference. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 16 and 17, there's where you're going to find the rapture. And the rapture is the time when Jesus comes back for the second coming. He sends his angels out, and the dead in Christ are raised. Okay. They come first. And then we, Paul says, who are remaining will be caught up in the air with them. So we're second in line, the people that are waiting, that are still alive when Jesus comes back. There's going to be billions of them. Okay. And so they're going to wait and watch the dead rise and get their new bodies. And then, of course, the evil people will get, some really bad bodies and be joined up with their souls that have been waiting in um, hell. And then they'll be forever banished, body and soul. But the Christians, they too will the ones that are on earth will be raised in their bodies and souls, and they will be changed in the twinkling of an eye. 1 Corinthians 15 tells us they will have their new spiritual bodies. Their souls have already been renovated. You have a new soul, a resurrected soul in your body now as a Christian. What you're waiting for is the new body. And once you have both of them, it's going to be total bliss. And that new body is going to be welcomed into the new heaven and new earth where we will live forever. Okay. So the rapture part of that is right after the dead are raised, then the bodies of the Christians are raised or raptured up into the air with Christ and the saints that came back from heaven with him, and the everybody else that's there who's a Christian is going to be in the air, Okay. And as a matter of fact, that's how everybody's going to be able to see Jesus, because we live on a globe Earth. So if Jesus is coming back on one side of the earth, how are the other people going to see them? But the Bible insists that everybody's going to see him. And the way that's going to happen is they're all going to be taken away from the earth. Okay. Then the earth is going to be destroyed. So there they are, hanging in the air, so to speak, and they see Jesus. Okay. Everybody in the world. Okay, now the difference between that Catholic interpretation I just gave you, which has been longstanding, there's really no question about this view at all. All the fathers, medievals, all believed it. The catechisms talk about it. These dispensational premillennialists believe that Christ is going to come back and he's going to come to earth for 1,000 years and reign in Jerusalem, literally sit on a throne in Jerusalem and reign for 1,000 years. And the Jews are going to be his ministers. Okay, 144,000 Jews from Apocalypse 7 and 14. And they're going to be converting Gentiles for the 1,000-year period in preparation for the eternal state that they believe is going to come after the 1,000 years. Okay, so that's a view. Well, let's just deal with the rapture part of it. Some of these people believe in a pre-tribulation rapture, a mid-tribulation rapture, and a post-tribulation rapture. And it really gets complicated. But before this 1,000 years comes, that Christ is going to come back and reign in Jerusalem, there's what they call a tribulation period. Okay, 7 years of tribulation. The world's in total chaos for 7 years. There are some evangelicals that believe that Christians are going to be raptured, that is taken out of the way to be with Christ at the beginning of this tribulation period, so that they will not be going through the tribulation period. They're called pre-tribulation rapturists. And then you have some people in the same camp theological camp, who believe in the mid-tribulation rapture. That is, after 3.5 years, the Christians are going to be raptured to be with Christ and taken out of the tribulation. And then you have, of course, those who believe that after the 7-year tribulation, the Christians are going to be raptured before Christ actually comes back again and reigns in Jerusalem for 1,000 years. Okay. That's all the rapture according to how the evangelicals see it. And depending on what church you go to, you're either a pre, a mid, or a post rapturist. Okay, so, but again, the Catholic view is very simple. So there is no pre, mid, or post. There is no tribulation period either. Okay, we are in the tribulation period now. All right, this is the Great Tribulation period in the Catholic view. So you could say basically in the Catholic view, the rapture comes after the Great Tribulation, but the tribulation is not 7 years. It's 2000 plus years. Okay. Yeah, this world is a great tribulation. So that's how we cover that issue. But the rapture in the Catholic view is just the end of time. It's when Jesus comes back and the Christians that are left on earth are raised with Christ in the air. That's it. Okay. So we do believe in a rapture. We just don't believe it in the same way these evangelicals do. Ah, okay. Question. Let me rephrase my question from last week. If Pope Francis were to publish an encyclical banning masses and forbidding Bible reading, would we be obliged to assent to it? The answer to that would be no. Okay. But since this is hypothetical, I'm answering it hypothetically. Okay. Because basically, um, anything that deals with this level of false doctrine, false teaching, the Pope could not say this infallibly. His life would be taken first before the Holy Spirit would allow him to do that. There may be some, motu proprio that he writes saying, we're going to, limit the masses or ban the masses or, nobody can read the Bible anymore and then give some flimsy reason for it. Okay. They're not infallible though. Okay. So theoretically speaking, he could come out and say something like that. Okay. But by conscience, and in order to remain a Catholic, although we give assent to the Pope, okay, there's a distinction the church makes in that if the Pope, for some reason, gave some, immoral teaching or limited our ability to honor and worship God, that, we can, take our stand against it for conscience sake until this matter is cleared up. Okay. So at least on a temporary level, we don't have to give our allegiance to the Pope for conscience sake. Okay. And the other level, of course, would be no Pope would ever give an infallible teaching like that, we're going to ban all the masses. Okay. That's the whole reason why we're Catholic, because we trust what Jesus said, that the gates of hell will not prevail against it, the church, that is. And if that's either true or it isn't true. Now, Jesus could let it get pretty bad, okay, pretty bad. And he did that a lot in the Old Testament. That's where we get our lessons from. Sometimes it got to the point where you just wondered if God was still in the country, still, helping the people, answering prayers, and it got that bad. Okay. And we might be there right now. But still, you have to trust that he will not let it get to the point where the whole church falls. Okay. Um, what sigma level would you assign to geocentrism? um, well, 6 is the highest. Okay. So I'd at least give it a 5. But considering now that's just on the science part. Okay. Just on the science part, I'd give it at least a 5. But on the theological and biblical, I'd give it a 6, definitely. Okay. And think about this. When St. Robert Bellarmine, who's the torch carrier for geocentrism, when he said that to Galileo and Foscarini and a lot of other people who were trying to, get heliocentrism accepted. He said that it's not correct. You have no proof for it. And even if you did, we would reinterpret our scripture to coincide with the proven scientific position. Okay. So he said a lot there. Now he's saying, first of all, that heliocentrism isn't proven by science, at least the science they had in that day, and that it can't be proven by science. It will never be proven by science. How do we know that? Even though he said that if, hypothetically speaking, they came up with proof of it, then we would change our interpretation of Scripture to abide by it. What did he do? He went ahead and condemned it as not being true. And if you do that in the Catholic Church, what you're saying is it will never be proven true. And by golly, his words have turned out to be true, haven't they? Because there is no proof and never has been for heliocentrism. All the assumed proofs like stellar parallax, stellar aberration, Doppler shift, you name it, they have all been discredited. And a lot of scientists don't even know this yet, okay, because they haven't studied the issue. They're so darn sure that, what Copernicus said was true. Most of them haven't even studied the issue. Most physicists I run into have not studied this issue. And so they're caught blind when I'm giving them all this scientific evidence. They never heard it before. They still think stellar parallax proves heliocentrism. Okay. So, man, they have a lot of catching up to do. But nevertheless, on all that, it's amazing what Bellarmine did. Even though he said, we'll change our interpretation of Scripture if you can prove it, he still went ahead and condemned it. And you don't do that in the Catholic Church unless you're darn sure that this thing is untrue and will never be proven true. Okay. And then the Pope backed him up and approved everything that he said. Okay. And this happened not only once, but twice. So, yeah, that's why I would give it a 6, just like Bellarmine gave it a 6. Bellarmine gave geocentrism a class 6 sigma evaluation. So I would do the same thing. Let's see if we can find another question here. Question: if I recall, under a certain Pope Pius, forget which one, allowed an imprimatur through a bishop of a heliocentric book. If according to heliocentrism is wrong, don't we have to question imprimaturs? Okay. Well, Galileo, before I deal with this question, Galileo got an imprimatur for his book in 1632. Of course, he did it by stealth because he knew the Pope wouldn't give him one. He went to Father Riccardi, who lived in Florence, and got Cosimo Medici II, who he used to tutor in math, who is now the Duke of Tuscany after his father, Cosimo Medici I. And they all met in Florence, and they brought some, showgirls along and some wine, and got Father Riccardi a little tipsy and put the political pressure on him to give Galileo an imprimatur for his book, the dialogue concerning the two great world systems. So he got his imprimatur, and inevitably, the Pope found out about it, and that's when the trouble started for Galileo. Okay. I mean, Galileo received an injunction, a legal injunction in 1616 by Paul V that said, don't even think about heliocentrism. Don't talk about it. Don't write about it. Don't speak about it. Don't even dream about it. And Galileo obeyed that for 7 years, and then he started writing this book that eventually got him in all the trouble. And this very same book, he got an imprimatur for by stealth in 1632. Pope found out about it, called him down to trial for disobeying what the church told him to do, and brought up this injunction that was given to him in 1616 by Paul V, and it was over. Okay, so and then what did the Pope do with the imprimatur? Of course, he tore it up, ripped it up. Okay, because imprimaturs are not infallible. Okay, they can be given by a bishop, but that bishop is dependent on his censor labori to make a thorough examination. And then the competence of the censor is always a question. Who is this who is examining the book? Pretty much the Catholic Church had very faithful, intelligent censors. But sometimes you'd get one like Father Riccardi, who was, tipsy when he gave his, his um, yes to the imprimatur, and then that imprimatur was taken away. Okay, so imprimaturs can be given without due merit, and if that's the case, they can be found out later. Then they can be rescinded. Okay, now the one you're talking about here, and I don't want to spend too long on this because I want to get through these questions, and we've covered this before on this show. This was Pius VII in 1821. And what happened here was that there was this amateur scientist, you might want to say, named Canon Tittle, who was a canon for the Catholic Church. So he was in the clerical realms. But he believed in heliocentrism, and he wrote a book. And in like 1813 or 14, it was, he submitted it to get an imprimatur, and he was declined by, I forget what his name was, Father somebody. And then he resubmitted it in 1820, and then they had a new censor there, and the ones that would give imprimaturs to books, they were called the masters of the sacred palace, and he would be like the prefect for the CDF today. Okay, the master of the sacred palace, and that at that time in 1820, that was Father Filippo Nrsvce, very faithful man to the Catholic Church, and Father Nrsvce said, no, we're not going to give you an imprimatur. So Canon Tittle, knew some people at the Vatican, and he went to Cardinal Maurizio Olivieri and said, can you help me? Because he knew Maurizio Olivieri, who was the a commissioner of the Index. And Tittle knew him from his clerical roundabouts and asked if he could help get the imprimatur for this book. And, Olivieri himself was devious, and he was a heliocentrist, did everything he could. And he went to Nrsvce, and they had a big argument about it. And Nrsvce said, no, over my dead body, will you give this, will this guy get an imprimatur? And he probably literally meant that. That's how faithful he was. And the reason he gave was that the 1616 and 1633 church condemned heliocentrism as a formal heresy. Therefore, I cannot give an imprimatur to this book that's promoting heliocentrism as a fact. Okay. And Olivieri didn't like that, so he went to Pius VII. Pius VII was a very weak pope, and you can read any commentary on Pius VII. He was very weak, and this poor pope had been incarcerated by Napoleon Bonaparte from 1809 to 1814, 5 years. He was incarcerated outside the Vatican in a little place in Florence, Italy. And when Napoleon came to take the Pope, basically stormed the Vatican, he took all the Galileo records away to France, put them in a library in Paris, France, and kept them there until 1845. So they weren't returned for what, almost 25 years. Okay, so the church had to function without these records, and this is the time that they needed them, because Maurizio Olivieri, who was trying to help Tittle get his imprimatur, made up a lie, a big, juicy, squeaky lie to Pius VII to get Pius VII to give his nod to give Tittle an imprimatur. And the lie that Olivieri said was that the 1616, contrary to what Father Nrsvce is saying, the 1616 church and the 1633 church under Pope Urban VIII, they didn't condemn heliocentrism. All they did was condemn Galileo's version of heliocentrism. And what he meant by that was that Galileo didn't have ellipses in the orbits of the planets because he didn't want to follow Kepler. And he says that's all there was to it. Other than that, everybody was for heliocentrism. And Pius VII, weak as he was, accepted Olivieri's argument. And there was no way that he could check. I mean, he could go to Infallibility and say, is this true? And Infallibility would say, no, it's not true. But, Olivieri could twist the Pope's arm, and the Pope had no records to go to verify whether Olivieri was telling the truth or not, because Napoleon Bonaparte had taken them all back to France, every single scrap. Okay, so Pius VII gave in and gave an imprimatur to Tittle. And one other fact about this is that Cardinal Collaraffi was the cohort to Maurizio Olivieri. And both of them, after they got the imprimatur for Tittle, then in 1823, they tried to get the Pope to take the names of Galileo and Copernicus off the books of the Index of Forbidden Books. And the council there that was called said, no, we're not taking them off. Okay. And maybe they had caught up with Olivieri's scheme. I don't know how you can keep that, something like that, without people finding out what you did, because this was the height of deception from a cleric, a high-placed cleric of the Catholic Church. He was a cardinal. And so they tried to get the names off the index, and they said no, and then that was it. They stopped. Then 8 years later, Cardinal Collaraffi, who was the cohort, as I said, of Maurizio Olivieri, became Gregory the 16th, Pope Gregory the 16th. Okay. And Pope Gregory the 16th, 4 years later, after he was installed as Pope in 1835, just waved his hand and took Copernicus and Galileo off the index. Okay. Now, you follow the breadcrumbs and you see what's going on. Okay. They first twisted Pius VII's arm with a lie, and Collaraffi was involved in that lie because he worked with Olivieri. And then, they try to take Galileo and Copernicus off the index, and they were unsuccessful. So when he becomes Pope, he takes them off willy-nilly and doesn't give one explanation of why he took them off. Silence. Just total silence. Nobody talks about it. So you know that there's mischief going on. All right. And it wasn't too long after this that in the 1840s and 50s, you just had this bombardment of liberal theology, evolution. They figured, hey, if the church is throwing in the towel on Copernicus and Galileo, well, let's just bring in Darwin and all the other guys. There were 6 guys that came before Darwin who were talking about evolution. Darwin was just the guy who wrote the most popular book of it in 1859. And, everybody thought Gregory's throwing in the towel. Let's, go whole hog after this. And the 1800s became one of the most prolific times of false doctrine that the church has never, ever taught about origins and things of that sort. They put up a good fight late in the 1800s. There were some really faithful Catholics who put up a good fight up until Pius X in, I think, what was his last year, 1910, was it? Or 11, 12, something like that. And then after that, it started to fall apart again. But yeah, you can thank Gregor the 16th for a lot of that. So that's, to answer your question, the story behind that. Okay, so let me go on. See if I can find another question on this. This is last week's questions, by the way. Okay. All right. Question: do Moses and Elijah in Transfiguration prove there was no limbo of the fathers, since they came from heaven before the crucifixion of Jesus, and that proves your view why Jesus descended to hell? Yeah, I would. That's one of the evidences I use. Okay. Um, Now, someone may make the excuse that Elijah was translated into heaven, body and soul. Okay, and he's the exception to the rule of people going to Hades. You see, the old view, and I call it the old view because I think it's wrong. That is, when the saints of the Old Testament, Abraham, David, Jeremiah, Isaiah, when they died, they went to a place called Hades and had to wait there until Jesus came. So Abraham, had to wait 2,000 years for Jesus to come. And Elijah would be an exception to that because the Second Kings, he's translated body and soul. Okay. But Moses, we're not so sure about because although Deuteronomy says we can't find the place of his burial, it says no one to this day knows where that burial is. And then we have in Jude, we have Michael the archangel disputing over the body of Moses against the devil. Okay. So that tells me that Michael won the dispute, took the body of Moses, and that's why they can't find the grave. And he was in heaven with Elijah and then came down on the Mount of Transfiguration to speak with Jesus. That's how that all happened. So that doesn't relate directly to this whole issue of limbo of the fathers, but indirectly it does. That's why I brought it all up. If you look at the passage where this is taken from, was it 1 Peter 3, 20, 19, 20, 21. Yeah, the old Catholic interpretation just doesn't fit the bill. That all these souls went to a compartment in Hades and had to wait there. You get other things like, when Jesus is confronting the Pharisees, actually the Sadducees who don't believe in the resurrection. And Jesus says, as far as resurrection is concerned, have you not read where it says, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? And that comes from Exodus 3, verse 6. And his logic is that, as he explains it to the Sadducees, his logic is, how can he be the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob if they aren't living? Okay. And so and he uses that to prove the resurrection. Well, that's interesting because Abraham's body is still in the grave. So is Isaac and Jacob. And they won't be raised until, as we said earlier, until the end of time when Jesus comes back. So, what resurrection are they talking about? Well, he's talking about the resurrection of the soul. Okay. That's what Abraham received when he was justified, as Paul elaborates on in Romans 4. And when you die and you've been resurrected in your soul, and we receive that now by baptism, your soul goes to heaven. Unless, of course, you have venial sins to account for, you're going to go to purgatory first. But that's the only stop you're going to make. Okay. So this whole limbo of the fathers thing, what would happen is, somebody be in limbo for 2,000 years, and then you're going to have to go to purgatory for how many odd years, and then you can finally get to heaven. It gets very complicated. And the reason for it is because that passage has been misinterpreted. 1 Peter 3:19 to 21 has been misinterpreted. And I give, and I'm not the first one to say this, okay, but I give the proper interpretation as I have gleaned it from others, what the proper interpretation of that passage is. And it does not talk about a limbo of the fathers. Okay, so, and it's just like the other limbo, that's been up for reevaluation too, because, the souls of infants who aren't baptized go to limbo. Well, that's just not a teaching of the church. Okay. It's been kicked around a lot, but it's never been dogmatized by the church. All right, let's go on here. Doctors, some Orthodox and even some Catholics claim that every bishop is St. Peter in some sense. Is there any validity to this? Well, you can play with words all you want, it just becomes a matter of semantics. I could say, I'm like Peter, I could say that in a certain sense because I'm the father of my family here. I take care of my family. It's like Peter takes care of the church. So, yeah, when you hear the word in some sense, you're in for some ambiguity. What we need to make, if you want to go that way, that's okay. But what we need to make clear is St. Peter is St. Peter, and the popes following him are special people, only fulfilled by a pope, not someone else. Okay. You can be like Peter. Okay. Like Jesus says, the Father says to us, be perfect as I am perfect. Okay. So we want to be like him, but we're not him. Okay. So, you have to keep those two things in mind. Any updates on the Papacy book? Yes, I just talked to Mr. Butler yesterday, and this one here, the keys over the Christian world. You see how far I got? I got that much more to edit right there, and then we're done, and this will be published. And then we're still working on Jesus, Peter, and the Keys, trying to get that into publication. And we're pretty near that. We have to make a deal with the publisher, which is Queenship Publishing. They don't have any copies left. So we're going to pay to get some printed up, and then we can go from there. I would say hopefully by the end of the year. Definitely both books will be available. So, all right. See if there's any more questions. What do you recommend for daily prayer life? I always do spontaneous prayers because that's just the way I feel most comfortable praying. Now, my wife is totally opposite me. She loves to have, the prayers written before her, written by various saints or whatever, and she recites those prayers, and that's good too. Okay. So you're asking probably the wrong guy because my prayers are always spontaneous and right from the heart, so to speak. And I very rarely, unless I'm at Mass or at a holy day or whatever, do I recite prayers written on a card or something like that. Okay. That's just me. Hi, Robert. Are the Jews from Israel today related to the tribe of Judah? If they are, I mean, if there are, yeah, legitimate Jews, we would say that they would have to extend back to the tribe of Judah because that was the last Jews that we had. The northern tribes were dispersed into the world in 722 BC, and the tribe of Judah and Benjamin lasted for what, another 150 years or so. And then what was left of them in Jesus's time, between the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Essenes, whoever, they were all dispersed in 70 AD and are dispersed again under Romans, the Roman legions attack in 136 AD, and they were all banished to Babylon until around the year 1000. And then from there, they went to Caesarea in southern Russia. And then from there, they went to Eastern Europe in, say, the 13, 1400s. But, you can trace the line. You can trace the line from Eastern Europe, and that's the Ashkenazi Jews. The Sephardic Jews actually went as far as Spain, and they went, the lower route of Europe and through the Mediterranean and all that, and ended up in Spain. So you got two branches of Jews, okay? And the Ashkenazis, you can trace the trail from, Eastern Europe to Caesarea in Russia, and then to Babylon, and then back to Palestine, okay, in the 2nd century. So, yeah, I mean, my answer would be yes to that. All right. Francis says is calling me mentally ill because I go to the traditional Latin Mass. Well, buddy with all the pedo priests. Yeah. Unfortunately, I can't disagree with you. All right. All right. You say that starlight farther out travels faster than stars closer in, and as a result, light arrives at Earth at the same time. But does that math really work? A star half as far as one further would have a head start on traveling toward the Earth. Yeah, but see, the light slows down. The closer that light beam gets to the Earth, the slower it's going to go. So it's constantly slowing down until it gets to our terrestrial light speed, which is 186,000 miles per second. Okay, so I think what you're saying is that it starts out at, say, now c is the speed of light in our terrestrial environment. So if, let's say, it starts out at 5c, okay, well, then a little while later it's going to be at 4c, and then 3c, and then 2c, and then 1c when it reaches the Earth. Okay, so it's constantly slowing down. So that's why the math will work, because when a star that's closer to the Earth starts out, it's going to start out at 4c, then go to 3c, 2c, 1c. Okay, the star further out starts to get 5c. Well, it's going to need that difference of c between 5c and 4c to make up the distance between itself and the next star in the radial line. Okay. All right. How do we casually talk to people about geocentrism without sounding crazy or losing their attention? Here's what I suggest. If you get somebody who wants to listen, then, do whatever you can for them. Okay. Depending on how much knowledge you have. If they don't want to talk about it, don't bother. Don't even attempt it. Okay. Like Jesus says, don't cast your pearls before swine. All right. Cut it off. Just didn't tell them. Say, hey, see, you're not interested. Fine. We won't talk about it. And go on with the rest of your evening or day. All right. Don't waste your time. Now, they may come back. I've had people do this. They come back to me and say, actually, I really want to know a little bit about this, and so I'll tell them. And the first indication I get, they don't want to talk about it, goodbye. Okay. I'm not going to waste my time. Believe me, I'm old enough to have figured this out. Okay. I was taught that Genesis are myth stories. That's right. That's what you're going to be taught in most of your grade school, high school, college, universities, and seminary today in the Catholic Church. That was not the case before. Okay. And it all changed in the 20th century. Yeah. And we can thank, Gregory the 16th for helping us get to that point. Because once you take Copernicus and Galileo off the index, you're looking for trouble. Okay. And that's what happened in the 1800s. That's when it all started. And then, as I said, the church put up a good fight up until the end. And even Pius X, made the seminarians take the oath against modernism. Okay. But then after he died, then, things got loosey-goosey again. And that's where we are today. So that's why you're reading about Genesis being all myth and legend and things like that. All right. How do we casually talk to people? Okay, you already asked me that. Many Catholic institutions have gone by the wayside today, totally infiltrated by the devil. Yeah. You guys want to hear a joke? One of my favorite jokes. Speaking of Notre Dame. A young man in high school believed he had a calling from the Lord to be a priest. He told his counselor, who then asked him what college he would like to attend first. The young man said, Notre Dame is my first choice, but I applied there and they didn't accept me. The counselor said, well, have you tried any other Catholic colleges, some of which are just like Notre Dame? The young man said, no, I just want to go to Notre Dame. I'm not interested in any other colleges. Well, said the counselor, I suggest you pray real hard to God. Maybe he could help you to get to Notre Dame, help you get Notre Dame to change their mind and accept you. Okay, said the young man, I will do just that. So the young man went home and started praying. He sent out a new application to Notre Dame and he prayed for weeks and weeks. Finally, he got an answer from Notre Dame, which said, quote, upon receiving your application, we are happy to inform you that we have reconsidered our previous decision and have decided to allow you to attend Notre Dame next semester, unquote. The man raced over to his high school counselor and told him the good news. The counselor said, that's wonderful. I'm so happy for you. But remember in your prayers tonight to thank God for what he did for you. Yes, I will do this. I will do so this very day, said the young man. In his prayer to God, he said, Dear God, thank you so much for answering my prayer and allowing me to attend Notre Dame. Suddenly, a voice from heaven said, you got into Notre Dame? Well, you're luckier than I am. I've been trying to get in there for years. I know you're all laughing out there. Okay. Okay. Question, could you make a series of shorter videos about some of the seemingly basic facts the modern world knows regarding cosmology and astronomy, but it's actually wrong about? Yeah, but I'm just afraid that the video is going to be loaded up on the negative side because most of what they think they know is not true. Okay, I'm talking about the Big Bang, the multiverse, dark matter, dark energy, all this stuff. They're good at collecting data from their instruments. Okay, but connecting the dots and making the right conclusions about the data, they are totally inept. And that's because they have an agenda. Their agenda is to take God off the stage. So whatever they can do to maximize that position, they will do. Okay. That's where all this talk about Big Bang comes from. Last week, I told you about how the Big Bang originated. It originated from Edwin Hubble seeing the galaxy redshifts and understanding from all that that the Earth was in the center of the universe. And he didn't like that. So he had to figure out some way to get out of having the Earth in the center. And the best way to do that was to create this Big Bang balloon and put all the galaxies on the balloon and take away the center. And that's why they believe in the Big Bang today. Okay. So no wonder everything that they interpret out there from the data is all wrong because they haven't got the basics down first, you see, because they had an agenda. What's the agenda? Keep the Earth out of the center. That's the agenda. Okay. All right. Let me see. Looking for a question. Is the SSPX in schism? The answer is yes. Okay, I just put a video up on our site today. I suggest you go see it. It's by Michael Voris. It's about an hour long, telling you the whole history of the SSPX. Okay, I have friends in the SSPX, so I don't say this lightly. Okay, but it basically is a cult. Okay, any um, group of Catholics that claim that they can break with Rome and go do their own thing, have their own masses and confessions and marriages and annulments and this and that, they're deluding themselves. Okay. But go, it's on our website. I asked Michael if I could put it up there. He said certainly. And go do it. Okay. It's worth every minute of the hour that you watch it. Uh, all right. When you came back to the Catholic Church, did you ever have a fear that you might be damning your soul? And if you did, how did you get over it? Nope, never had that fear. No, I had the fear that if I didn't become Catholic, I might be damning my soul. That's for sure. All right. See, question about the heavens. Is it the same as what the CIA files calls um, them dimensions? Please elaborate. No. Um, the word dimensions um, has been twisted to mean certain things that it never used to mean. Okay. Um, because time has become a dimension, and then some people talk about the fifth dimension. Well, not the singing group, but a legitimate fifth dimension. And then string theory has 10 dimensions, and then superstring theory has 11 dimensions. They throw around dimensions like it's just uh, you know but it's very confusing for people. Okay. They're not using dimensions in the same Euclidean sense that we are used to using it. Okay, three dimensions: length, width, height. That's Euclidean. Now we have Riemannian dimensions. That's two dimensions. That's where they get the Big Bang idea. How do you support? Because they all talk in math. So how do you support the idea that there's just a balloon with no center? Well, you use Riemannian math, which deals in two dimensions. Okay. So they go both ways. They subtract a dimension and then they add dimensions. Okay. So, and with math, it's easy. You can wiggle your way out of anything with math. You can make it say basically anything you want. Okay. And that's what's dangerous about math. And yet they all talk in math. Okay. Now they do talk in concepts as well, but they have this mystique about them that because they can put their ideas in math equations, that gives the math equation or the idea some validity. Just because you can put it into a math equation, no. All it means is that you're making one side of the equation balance with the other side of the equation. That's all it means. It doesn't mean that you have the right substance on each side of the equal sign. Okay. It just means you made everything, you know, AB equals CD. That's all you did. Okay. And they think because they can make everything equalize out that somehow they've got the answer. They don't. Okay. And that's the problem with modern physics today. All right. Let's see if there's any more questions here. So I spent an hour and 10 minutes on this. Okay. It looks like we're done with the questions here. So I'm going to let these go. And we're going to come back to the questions that were first put up here. All right. Omar says, what are your thoughts on the brown scapular and its promises? I've always felt uneasy about the claim that Our Lady will save the world with it, and it feels a bit superstitious. Well, I've got to admit that I have the same feelings about it. Okay. Now, I could be totally wrong. Okay. And so could you. All right. So for the people that wear it and believe in the alleged promises that were given, all power to them. Okay. I am a bit more skeptical, and therefore I don't wear it. Okay. Some of these promises are a little bit too extravagant to. Now, I believe that heaven allows these things because some people need them. Okay. But for those of us who don't need them, we're not going to miss out on anything if we don't wear the brown scapular, okay, or the green scapular, okay. So it's like an apparition. You don't have to believe in the apparition. You don't have to believe in the brown scapular either. Okay. It's not a required dogma of the faith. So you, as a Catholic, have the prerogative to decline. Okay. That doesn't mean you can judge others, though. Okay. And that's where you have to leave it. All right. So thanks for that question. I know James White asked you about it in your purgatory debate. What was it he said, and I don't remember that at all. I don't remember him asking me that question. Question from David. Is the church's main source in scripture for purgatory Matthew 12:32? The church doesn't have a main source, but that's one of the chief ones. I think the one that's more important than that would be 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 15. That's the one St. Augustine used, and a lot of the other fathers. Okay, so, and I've done some very detailed exegesis of that passage going into the original Greek. Augustine just approached it from a topical aspect. I go into a exegetical, grammatical analysis of that. Augustine didn't know Greek, okay, so he couldn't go in that direction. But there's all kinds of good information in there to support the idea of purgatory for Catholicism. One is like, what's the word? It says in 1 Corinthians 3:15, he shall be saved, yet so as by fire. And then the other thing it says, if his works don't abide, he shall suffer loss. Now that word or phrase, suffer loss, is a word that it's going along with the metaphor of the building on that's being burnt in 1 Corinthians chapter 3. So when something is burnt, naturally you're going to suffer loss if your house burns down. So in that sense, that's a good translation of that word. Zemiao is the Greek word. Okay. But zemiao, if you look up its etymology, especially in the Septuagint version of Proverbs, is where it's used mostly. It has the definition of punishment. Okay. And as a matter of fact, zemiao is used preponderantly of punishment and very rarely of suffering loss. It would be suffer loss in a metaphorical context. Okay. But the actual concrete definition of zemiao is punishment. So, and you can look this up in Greek lexicons. They'll have that information there. And so I did a thorough study on that. And I checked the Greek from other sources and it said the same thing. So that coincides exactly with the idea of purgatory being some kind of punishment that was not taken care of, when you were on earth for the venial sins that you have. Okay. So even though metaphorically it might be used as suffering loss, historically, etymologically speaking, it's talking about punishment. And that fits right in with the context. So you might have a double entendre there. Okay. The phrase, yet so is by fire. Yet so is a Greek adverb, hutos, and it means in the same way, or in this way, he shall be saved by fire. Well, I mean, in the same way as what? Well, the previous verse said that the fire was going to test each man's work to see what it was made of. Gold, silver, and precious stones, or wood, hay, and stubble that burns up real easy. Okay. And basically the word hutos means in the same way the man's going to be put through the fire. And those are the fires of purgatory. Okay. And the day will declare it. So it's going to burn up all the wood, hay, and straw, so to speak, and leave the gold, silver, and precious stones, and then he's ready for heaven. Okay. So yeah, there's a lot there. And that would be the main passage that we would go to. Okay. Question. Maybe Martin Luther was meant to take out 7 books from the Bible. What if that was God's will, the inspiration of the Holy Spirit? Your thoughts on Protestant reasoning? No. That would never happen. Okay. Look, these books were already accepted as early as the Council of Rome in 380 AD. You had Council of Hippo, Carthage, Nicaea, Florence, all accepting the same canon. All right. And then you get these little blips coming along. Even one of our Catholic cardinals, Cardinal Cajetan, was questioning some of the books of the Bible in the 1600s. And Martin Luther the same. Of course, Martin Luther had, ulterior motives to his questioning, because he didn't like James saying that man was justified by works and not by faith alone. Okay. And then he got to looking at a couple other books that may have implied that, works count in your justification, like Hebrews or Revelation, and didn't like those either. Okay. So God would never use a Protestant like that, especially since the canon has already been passed down by tradition. And we have the same canon they had, in the fourth century, or even in Athanasius' time. He had many books of the New Testament already. Not quite sure what you're asking here. I mean, how do you you think that the Holy Spirit would use somebody like Martin Luther? Uh, that would not be the case. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean that the Holy Spirit can't use Protestant scholars to help us understand the Bible. There's a lot. Hey, these Protestant guys, they know their Greek, they know their Hebrew, and they could run circles around most Catholics. Okay, so yeah, a lot of them do have some, nuances of the grammar, of contextual, hermeneutics that we Catholics could learn from. Okay, so in that sense, yeah, we can go to them and get some help, so to speak. Well, on the final decision, that's us. Okay, we can get all the data that we want. The final decision is going to have to jibe with Catholic theology. Okay, so but any truth, as the Catholics have believed, can help the Catholic Church understand the world we live in. Okay, there's no truth that the Catholic Church would never accept. Well, we're not going to accept that because you're Protestant. No. Okay, you got some good thoughts, we'll accept them and we'll use them, but the end decision is going to be Catholic. Okay, all right. um Flat earther, you're not welcome here. And we're not going to talk about the flat earth because it ain't flat. Question. Let's say Pope F leaves office for whatever reason and unable to elect another. Chair is vacant for a long time. Are we to follow pre or post Vatican II teachings? Is it wide open? We follow both. Okay. And we try to integrate them as best we can. And this question was asked last week. Okay. Question. Good evening. Bishop Barron has said Genesis reads like theological poetry. You've said it reads like a newspaper. I prefer your stance. How can there be such a difference in opinion? Well, because this is what Bishop Barron wants to believe. Okay. He wants to believe that Genesis is like poetry because he thinks that's going to give him license to massage the history out of existence. Okay. But whether it's poetry or a newspaper, okay, the Bible, when it touches on issues of history, the cosmos, science, whatever it is, it's going to tell you the truth, no matter what form it comes in. And as I said before, the Psalms, which is all poetry, okay, all of it. There's no newspaper accounts in the Psalms, but that's the book that's quoted the most for historical truth in the New Testament. Okay, next to Isaiah. So it doesn't make any difference whether it's poetry or not. Okay, now it makes it even harder if it's written like a newspaper and you're trying to, allegorize it or figuratize it or whatever. As a matter of fact, Augustine, poor Augustine, he's trying to interpret the Genesis literally, and he's having a hard go of it. Okay. And I don't think he put a good effort into it. When I read his book, I don't think he really put a good effort into it. It's like he came across a stumbling block and then, figured, oh, and then I have another one. And he didn't take time to think it out. Okay. Like the other fathers did, Basil especially, and Chrysostom. And so he comes up with this, figurative interpretation. But when you read his figurative interpretation, it's a lot more fantastic, obtuse, and hard to understand than his literal interpretation was. Okay. So he didn't do us any favors by, giving us a figurative interpretation and seemingly, escape the difficulties of a literal translation of Genesis. It just didn't help us. His figurative interpretation is all over the place. And that's what happens when you start figuratizing history. You basically can go anywhere you want because you can make up any figures you want. This represents this and this represents who knows? Who cares? How do you know that? You don't. Okay, you're just making it up as you go along because it sounds good to you. And this is why allegorical interpretation, metaphorical, never really stuck. Sooner or later, everybody found out that it's all your imagination. Okay. And the only reason people are reading it is because you try to tie it to some truth, in the New Testament. Well, this, character here represents Jesus when Jesus did this and all. Well, that sounds all pretty. Okay. But how do you prove that? Okay. And so you make the Bible into some kind of magical book that has these figures that are just waiting for someone to find the right, figurative application so he can, make this grandiose conclusion. And wow, how smart we are, We don't need any of that. Okay. It confuses the issue more than it helps. But when you get to Genesis, look, and you read a passage that says, and there was evening and morning the first day, and then you get to the next passage that says, and there was evening and morning the second day. And then you get to the plants and it says, and there was evening and morning the third day. And then the fourth day and the fifth day and the sixth day. You're like, okay, this is not poetry. Okay. This guy's trying to tell me something. There's evening and morning 6 times in a row. If that's not like a newspaper, I don't know what is. Okay. It's like giving the itinerary of day by day itinerary of what's going on. Okay. So how can that be poetical? Now, the only difference is like when you get to Genesis 2, now what's happening is since the whole creation is made, man is made, God is now going to relate personally to Adam. And so you're going to get a topical arrangement of events rather than the chronological events of Genesis 1. Genesis 1 had a specific purpose. Here's the chronology, the exact chronology of how things were made. Genesis 2, here's how God's going to relate to Adam. Okay, and then it goes through. And so it borrows facts from Genesis 1, but then it puts them in a certain order the way it wants to display this relationship that God's going to have with Adam. As a matter of fact, God changes his name. Before in Genesis 1, he's Elohim. Okay, and that's why it says, let us make man in his image, because it's a plural word. And then when he comes, it's like saying, Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith created this in day 1, day 2, day 3. Okay, so you're giving like the biography of Mr. Smith. And then you get to Genesis 2, and he changes his name. Well, that doesn't change it, he just adds to it. Now it's Yahweh Elohim. Okay. Yahweh is that's the, the tetragrammaton. That's the ultimate name of God. I am who I am. Okay. So it's like saying John Smith. John, we give names to our children that mean something. What does John mean? God is increasing. Is that John or is that Joe? Anyway, you get the idea. So when you're saying Yahweh Elohim, that's like the first and last name. Okay. Not exactly, but that's as close as we can come in our colloquial sense. So John Smith now is going to get personal. and he's going to relate to Adam personally. And he's going to make Adam till the field, and he's going to water the garden for Adam, and he's going to say, Adam, there's these trees there. I love you a lot, buddy. Please don't eat this one, okay? Or you will die. That's very personal, okay? You can't get more personal than that. So this is a life and death situation. And then he creates Eve, and Adam names the animals. That's all personal too. Naming the animals. Wow. So the whole context is different. So that's why you have a difference between Genesis 2 and Genesis 1. You're just retelling the story in a different way, much more personal way. But see, these liberal critics who don't want to believe in the creation because they believe in the Big Bang theory, because that's what keeps them their jobs, basically. Well, that's just all myth and legend, And then they try to find instances in Genesis 1 or 2 where they can say, you see, it's contradicting itself. You see, Genesis 1 says that the animals are created before man, and then Genesis 2 says God creates the animals and brings them to Noah to see what he would name them. So the animals and Adam are made at the same time. So that's contradictory. So obviously this can't be history, you see. But what they fail to do is see why Genesis 1 puts it chronologically and why Genesis 2 puts it topically. Because you're now in a whole different context. Okay? So like I said, it borrows facts from Genesis 1, but it rearranges them the way it wants to. Okay? But no, these liberal guys like Bishop Barron, they could care less what this explanation is that I just gave. Because they are bent on believing in the Big Bang theory and all the trappings that come with that. And they all base it on, Father Lemaitre, this 1936 liberal theologian who, supposedly, gave us the Big Bang. He didn't. Okay. All he did was take the Big Bang theory that Hubble gave him and said, what happens if we reverse the process? And he went backwards. And that's how he came up with this cosmic egg. Okay, that's all he did. And he put a couple of equations to it. But everybody bows down to Father Lemaitre. Oh, gee, I had a guy the other day say, well, the Big Bang theory came from a Catholic priest. How can you deny that? Well, because all the fathers did, and all the medievals did, and all the theologians before Father Lemaitre. That's why we do that. And the Bible doesn't talk about a Big Bang or evolution. That's why we do that. Okay? Very simple. All right, let me go on. Question, doesn't whatsoever you shall loose upon earth shall be loosed also in heaven imply that dogmas can later be undogmatized, or is it only referring to church discipline? No, it's just a general statement that, binding is putting something together, loosening is taking it apart. That's just a synecdoche way of saying that, look, whatever you think is right, you can do. Okay. And we're going to back you up. That's the important part of it. So whether you're putting something together or taking it apart, we could, if you want to make an analogy of it, you could say when someone is in heresy, you have to go in there and take it apart bit by bit to see what they're saying, why they're saying it, when they said it, who they said it to, and all this stuff. So you're taking the whole thing apart so you can analyze it and figure out whether this guy is a formal heretic or not. Okay. Other times you bind things together. You take this idea from this father and this idea from that father and what this previous council said, and you put it all together and you bind it all together and you make another dogma for the church, you see? So that's basically what Jesus is saying. How can you have proof that God exists? I'll give you the same answer Paul gave. Go out and look at the stars and the trees and the grass and the wind blowing and all that stuff, And you're going to know that it doesn't get there by itself. That's what Paul said. As a matter of fact, he said that's so good of a proof that you know instinctively that you should worship, fall down on your knees right now and worship God. That's how good that proof is. And those who say no are because they're suppressing that truth, because they know how good it is. So they have to suppress it. Okay? All right. Question. If Francis issued an encyclical saying the Mass and Bible are now obsolete and gay clergy may now marry, and disagreeing with these is a sin. Okay, so basically you're just putting new elements in the same question we answered before. Okay, and I'll give the same answer to it as I did last time. What would be the strongest evidence or proof Darwinian evolution is wrong? The fossil record is the first one. Okay. According to Darwin himself, he says if we cannot find in the fossil record transitional forms, that is, you have a reptile and you got an amphibian. Okay. A transitional form would be a, semi-reptile that's turning into a semi-amphibian that you would find somewhere in the fossil record, the transitional fossil between the reptile and that amphibian. Okay. And he said, if you don't find any, then evolution is false. Okay. Now, they have been searching for a transitional fossil form, one that everybody can recognize. Oh, yeah, that's a transitional form. And they've never been able to find one. Okay. Now, if that doesn't knock evolution, then it's never going to be knocked out. Okay. And they know this. The leading evolutionist back in the 20th century, Stephen Jay Gould of Harvard, you can't get much higher than that on the academic scale. Okay. Wrote lots of books, and his what's his name? Niles Eldridge was his partner. He's from the British Museum of Natural History. And Niles Eldridge, Stephen Gould spent most of his time in the classroom and writing books and stuff, but Niles Eldridge actually went out to the field to find fossils. And he admits in his book he never found a transitional fossil. Okay. And so he and Gould came up with this theory in the 1980s. And they said, look, at the Chicago conference, I think it was 1980. And then in 1982, they came out with a statement that said, we have to solve this problem that we can't find these transitional fossils. And so what he did was he made up a new theory, invented a new theory. And this is what happens. If they can't get the evidence to support their theory, then they just invent something else. It's like, we can't find the energy to support the Big Bang theory, so we'll invent it and we'll call it dark energy and we'll make everybody believe that it exists, even though we don't have evidence for it. Same thing. Okay. So they invented this theory, which is called punctuated equilibrium. Very fancy word. All it means is that there were fossils there. No, it doesn't mean that. It means these transitional forms were there, but they, and so that's where the punctuated part comes. They punctuated the fossil record because they were there. Okay. But what happened was the elements took over and erased any evidence of them actually making fossils. Okay. Before they could actually make a fossil. So in other words, they're there, and then they were whisked away somehow before they can make a fossil. That's why we don't find these transitional forms. And they accepted that. Punctuated equilibrium. Now, it's just total nonsense. It's the logical fallacy of trying to prove the very thing, or it's the logical fallacy of using as proof the very thing you're trying to prove. Okay? So you just assume that the fossils were there, but somehow they just disappeared. That's why you don't find them today. Oh, but we find all the other fossils, the reptilian fossils, the amphibian fossils, the bird fossils, we find all those in their natural form, without any transitions. So why didn't, your scheme that somehow these transitional fossils were taken away when all the regular fossils are still there that have no transitions? Okay. So see, these guys are trapped. There's another evolutionary biologist at Harvard named Richard Lewontin. And he's famous for saying, look, we know our theory doesn't work, but we have no other choice, being the materialists that we are, and the fact that we're not going to let a divine foot in the door. That's his exact quotation. Okay? So, game over. Game over. These guys know exactly what they're doing. It's all to get God off the stage because they're all atheists and they are self-admitted atheists. Okay? That's what evolution's all about. And then these stupid Christians come along and they go, oh, well, we got to be accepted by the world, They believe in evolution. How are we going to talk to them if we start talking about the creation made in 6 days? We got to embrace evolution. So they come up with a stupid idea called theistic evolution, where somehow, we'll just depend on God to make everything evolve, And there's absolutely no evidence in the Bible for this at all. But to be accepted in the upper echelons, okay, in academia, and keep your 6-figure salary and your sheepskin on the wall, well, we're going to go along with the evolutionists. You see, that's what's happened. Don't get me started. All right, somebody asked here, if you say something is true and cannot be changed, how then can you get around that? I don't know if you're talking to me or somebody else, so I can't answer that question. But if it's true, you can't get around it. All right. All right. Question, can we use the Pax Romana as a fulfillment of the prophecy that when the Messiah comes, there will be peace on earth? No, because the Pax Romana was a political thing started by, the Romans. And, the Romans were smart because, they weren't going to fight every culture and say, you have to dissolve your whole culture in order to become a Roman citizen. They allowed every place they went, they allowed the people to keep their culture, keep their literature, just obey the Roman government. That's all, and pay us your taxes. Okay. And we'll protect you. Okay. Just don't give us any trouble. So they were pretty smart. But it has nothing to do with the Messiah coming on earth. And there won't be peace. Well, there might be a false peace. Okay, when Jesus returns, because it says in Matthew 24, he says, the days of the Son of Man, when he returns, it'll be like the days of Noah. They were eating and drinking, marrying, until the day the flood came and washed them all away. So they all thought things were going fine. Normal society. Okay, that's the picture that Jesus creates. So there might be peace, and Jeremiah talks about that in Isaiah right before they went into Babylonian captivity. They all say peace, peace. They're all enjoying peace. eating, drinking, having a good old time. And then, of course, the Babylonians come and take them all away. Okay, so um, all right. So Norman is trying to answer this question. Both species are fully Christ. You are receiving the body and blood of Christ in the Eucharistic bread, and you are receiving the body and blood of Christ in the Eucharistic wine. Yeah, I know that's the teaching, Norman, but do we have any dogmatic statements that say that? That's what I was trying to um, remark on. Okay. And I'm not ready to bring the hatchet down on that yet until I find such treatment of it from the church. Okay. So, because I've heard the same thing you have heard, but the question is that exactly true? Okay. All right. When reading Not by Faith Alone, should I be using a more common Bible? I think I already answered that because you asked that last week. Yeah. Question: why didn't the Pope slap Joe Biden? And from last week, what is the Catholic view on the rapture? Okay, we got that. Okay, Michael, you said you're here to hear my response on your question. So I hope I answered it. Okay, so David says there's also a Nrsvce available. And what that is the new Revised Standard Version Catholic Edition. That's what that stands for. Now, the new Revised Standard was that was made in 1989, and it's relatively good, except there are some places that it takes a little bit more liberty in what they call the dynamic equivalence realm than the RSV, the original RSV did. And that's because it's separated by what? 35 years. Things changed a lot in 35 years in biblical translations, believe it or not. And it was always leaning toward the dynamic equivalence dimension of translation rather than the literal. Okay. But that is available in the Catholic edition. And of course, the Catholic censor would go through it and make sure there wasn't anything that shouldn't be there. All right. Thank you for that there, David. What do you say to the situation in Germany, to this synodal way? Well, it's hard to figure out what Francis is trying to do here. I don't think he really knows what he's doing. Okay. I mean, I have to be honest. He just throws these things out. I don't know if they're trial balloons or he thinks he's doing something good for the church. And then at one point he says the bishops aren't going to even judge the end of this synod way, just going to be up for grabs for all the people that are there. That's been implied. So you just don't know where he's going, what he's doing. I mean, I don't know. I just don't think he is a good pope. Okay. So, would you debate Jay Dyer? I think you are the only Catholic that can defeat him. I haven't heard of Jay Dyer. If he wants to debate something and it's worthwhile, I certainly will debate him. My debating days are a little thin today because I'm a lot older than I used to be, and it's not as easy as it used to be, getting everything together. I had a lot more energy in my younger years than I do now. So I have to be careful there. Kyle Mark says, could that 1,000 years be one day, though? No, it could not. They believe in a literal, that's the whole reason why they believe in it, because they take the 1,000 years in Apocalypse chapter 20 literally instead of figuratively. Okay. The normal way you interpret prophecy is it's filled with a figurative language. Okay. That's just the way prophecy comes to us in the Bible. Very rarely is it ever literal. You might get mixtures of it, like, say, in Matthew 24, you have a mixture of literal and figurative there. But by and large, especially in the Apocalypse, okay, it's symbolic, figurative. What you're thinking about is 1 Peter 3:8, where it says, to the Lord, 1,000 years is like a day, and a day is like 1,000 years. That's what you're thinking of. Now, that passage, unfortunately, is abused. Okay. It doesn't mean that 1,000 years is a day. It says 1,000 years is like a day, in the sense that 1,000 years could go by and nothing really significant is going to happen. So it's like a day went by. Okay. Then there are other times where a day is like 1,000 years. In other words, all kinds of important things happen in one day or a week or a month. And it's like 1,000 years has been crammed into it, you see. So it's a metaphor. It's not a one-to-one correspondence. And that's where people get mixed up on this, trying to interpret prophecy by going to 1 Peter 3:8. That's not going to work. Okay. See, here's where somebody says it. 1,000 years is a day, and a day is no. It doesn't say that. Okay. It says like. All right. Robert says, thoughts on the election last night, Virginia and New Jersey. Well, I think in New Jersey, the Democrat won, and in Virginia, the Republican won. If I'm not correct, somebody let me know. That's as far as I'm taking it. I haven't watched the news about it, so that's as far as I know. So Joseph says that what I said about the Pope losing his life is false. Okay, so he says the Holy Spirit would not kill the Pope before he taught heresy. He may not kill the Pope, but there may be some way of inhibiting him from teaching heresy. Okay, killing him is one. Using some kind of normal process to get him out of office could be another. I don't know. But look, somehow, some way, Jesus Christ is going to stop a pope from teaching heresy. The man who is pope would lose his office by the fact of teaching heresy. No. Okay. You're coming from the, sedi vacantis position. You have to prove that the pope is teaching heresy. And what tribunal are you going to use to do that? Okay. If it's true, as we have taught, that no one judges the Pope, okay, as canon law says, then there can't be a tribunal who's going to judge the Pope and dictate that he's in heresy. So that's the problem you have. Okay. You are not going to be the one that judges the Pope, although all the sedi vacantis side think they have that prerogative to judge the Pope themselves and say he's in heresy by their own standards. They think they can do that. Well, I'm sorry, you don't, because you have no authority to judge the Pope, and no one else does either. Okay? So, your alternative here that, he's going to lose his office. What do you think is going to happen? You think the Pope's going to say, oh, I just taught a heresy. I'm going to depose myself now? That ain't going to happen. Okay? And there's nobody else there that has the authority to judge him, to take him out of office. Okay? So Yeah, you still have the same problems. They're always going to come back to haunt you in this sedevacantist position that you take. Okay. All right. Um, Saint Francis de Sales taught that as well as many saints. It doesn't matter. There's a lot of other saints and theologians that have different opinions. Cardinal Bellarmine got 5 of them together, and they were all different. They all opposed one another. Okay. He had his opinion. Suarez had his opinion. Uh, Melchior Cano had his opinion. Everybody's got an opinion. Okay. Obviously, Holy Spirit didn't give us an answer to that question. After 2,000 years, no pope dogmatized how you take a wicked pope out of office. Okay. All we have is opinions from pious people. And you know as well as I do in the Catholic Church, that doesn't go very far when we're talking about dogma and how and why or when that we know what is the right thing to do. That comes from church dogma. It doesn't come from pious opinion, especially when they're all different. Pope Francis says Biden is a good Catholic. What constitutes a bad Catholic? Oh, don't you know? Those that follow the tradition, you want to be traditionalists, they're crazy. They have some mental problems. And, that's being a bad Catholic, you see. Those that have more than 3 children, oh, yeah, they're like rabbits. Okay. Those that want to pray the traditional prayers of the Latin Mass, you've got some, uh, either they're schizophrenic or whatever, something's wrong with you. All right. Is not the Pope to defend and not change anything that has been dogmatically declared before him who is alive and is on the seat? Yes. Okay. See, but this is how the dogma of infallibility can be abused. Okay. Because the Pope could say a lot of things without invoking infallibility. Okay. In other words, without invoking that I'm speaking ex cathedra from the chair of Peter to the universal church and I'm teaching doctrine, filling all the 4 criteria of Pastor Aeternus, you can go under that umbrella or under that radar and start teaching things, on a much less authoritative level and get away with it. Okay. That's the problem with this infallibility thing. It's good in one sense where, we can nail doctrines down and, declare ipso facto, you must believe this in order to be a Catholic. But then that leaves a whole vacuum of other things that are not said from the infallible chair that are said on a much lower authority. And now, how much impact are they supposed to have? Okay. So, as much as the infallibility can be helpful, in its wake, it can be harmful. Okay. Because then we start to abuse the system. All right. I already answered that. There is good reason to think that formal infallible church teaching is that the earth is the center of the universe. Yes. Very good, Joseph. Thank you for that. As a matter of fact, when you think about it, I mean, in 1616, under Paul V, he gives his criteria, and then Urban VIII in 1633, gives his criteria. And if you look at the criteria, okay, they fulfill every aspect of Pastor Aeternus, the 4 criterion for infallibility. Okay. It's dogmatic, a formal teaching. And how do we know that? Because heresy was involved. How do we know that? Because the church had to declare Copernicanism a heresy in order for Galileo, 17 years later, to be convicted of being suspect of heresy. You can't be convicted of being suspect of heresy unless the heresy has already been defined. And that was defined in 1616. And then as far as making it universal, both popes, Paul V and Urban VIII, sent letters out to all the papal nuncios in universities in Italy and in Europe, letting them know what the church's decision was and that they had to abide by it. And they wanted a response right away. And if they didn't give the response, the church came after them to get the response. That's how serious it was. Okay. Bellarmine said it was a teaching of faith and morals. The Pope agreed with him. Why? Well, because his 11 counselors came back and said to say that heliocentrism is true is a formal heresy. Well, what's heresy? Well, heresy is a going against any faith or morals that the church is teaching. That's heresy. So obviously it was an issue of faith and morals. Okay. And Bellarmine had already explained why. Because he said the scripture teaches it and the fathers endorsed it. They gave the official interpretation, and the church has followed that ever since. That is, the fathers gave the interpretation, and the church followed that ever since in her tradition. And then in 1616, the church, the magisterium, put its own stamp on that and said, yes, this is the official interpretation. And anything other than it is heresy. So it's a matter of faith and morals. Okay? So all the criterion are there. Okay? And that's even before the church even knew what the definition of infallibility was, because that wasn't defined until 250 years later, in 1870. And yet we see all the criterion in the Galileo affair. All right. So, yeah, I'll agree with you. All right. It's 10 o'clock. I've gotten halfway through these questions. So I tried my best tonight, folks. I think I must have answered at least 50 questions. And it's just getting tougher and tougher. So I'm going to have to go. And we'll be here next week. So that will be November the 10th. Okay. Look forward to it. Hope I have helped you in your Catholic faith, in your walk. And see if there's anything else I need to say. Oh, remember the Collegium, where we have our new school, 4-year college in Hagerstown, Maryland. If you would like to, if you know anybody who's looking for a college, very inexpensive, $16,000 a year, both semesters. Great teachers, great subjects, traditional minded. In downtown Hagerstown, there's St. Mary's Catholic Church, just a block up, that has the traditional Latin Mass, and we've got a hotel for the dorms, and we've got the University of Maryland facility for our classrooms. We are moving, and so yeah, it's a good place to go. So think about that. That would be www.the-collegium.org. Okay. And what else? Oh, please visit our website, robertsungenis.org. And we have a 20% discount. I believe that Lawrence has put that up there. 20% discount. And however, as I said last week, we have to charge tax now. Okay. So because they've been charging me for a year, and I've been paying it for everybody. And I can't do that anymore. Okay. So we'll have to charge tax when you buy materials. Also, I found out that YouTube is putting commercials on my show. I told them not to, that I refuse to have their commercials, and they put them up anyway. So what does that tell you about YouTube? So I'm sorry, because they can be very annoying, those commercials. Every 15 seconds or something now, they're coming up with a commercial. And I'm going to do everything in my power to get rid of them, but I want you to know that was not my decision. That was some corporate decision way above me at YouTube that made that decision. So I just want to let you know that. Okay. I'm not in this for the money. Okay. So I'm not, going to burden you with commercials so I can make a few pennies on the side here. That's not my motive or direction. And I just wanted to let you know that. Okay. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye and we'll see you next week. God bless you.